Yeah, so let me tell you when I came in contact with him. It was in the year 2000 that I came to the California Institute of Integral Studies to do my PhD. And I started in January of the same year. And I think it was in June that I was contacted by an individual by the name of Matthias Cornelissen, who was putting together a conference in Pondicherry. And he wanted my involvement at that conference. He knew that I was going to do my PhD on the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo. And in that context, he put me in touch with Rajivji. And the reason was because he thought that Rajivji would be able to fund my travel, or Infinity Foundation would be able to fund my travel to Pondicherry. So that was the context in which I came in contact with Rajivji. I met Rajivji perhaps, in 2004 or 2005. I had gone to New York for a few days, and from there I traveled to Princeton to be with him. And I think that was when our meeting happened for the first time. But by then we had interacted so much, through emails and phone, that it's slightly difficult for me to recollect, when I met Rajivji for the first time in person. But before I met him, my contact with him started, way back in the year 2000. I came to the US for my PhD, and then I was connected with Rajivji and Infinity Foundation. So my connect with Rajivji did not happen prior to my coming to the US, but it had happened after I came to the US. So as I told you, my movement towards the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo happened in a very big way in the year 1998. And this was after 5 years of deep inquiry that I had undertaken from the year 1993 to 98. My bachelor's is in chemistry, incidentally, and my master's is in applied psychology. And given the Indian context, you can understand what a quantum jump it was from chemistry to psychology. And that too, after having performed very well academically in chemistry. So I was basically undergoing a process of inquiry, and that was taking me in many different directions of Indian thought as well as Western thought. So I went into Western psychology, Western philosophy, Western literature, Indian literature, and so on and so forth. This was the journey that I had undertaken, and towards the culmination of that journey, I can say that my movement towards Sri Aurobindo happened in a very big way. Now, people who are familiar with the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo would know that Sri Aurobindo has not only written on spiritual matters, but he has written on matters that can lead to transformation of India in a very big way. So in a certain sense, this was the background with which I came. Now, my intellectual honing basically began when I came in contact with this e-group that Rajivji was running back then. And on that e-group, there were many conversations that would happen pertaining to India that were very important and that are very important. And people who are familiar with this background would know that Rajivji would write a lot, and I would respond a lot. So there was a lot of back and forth that went between Rajivji and me. So in a certain sense, with this background that I have in Sri Aurobindo and the conversations that happened between Rajivji and me, it is very difficult for me after 25 years, almost 24 years to be precise, to tease out, what influences came from where. But one thing is very certain, you know, in that E group, I gained a clarity with respect to the problematic relationship that exists between India and the West in terms of scholarship. And for that, I would completely uh, attribute my understanding to the conversations that I had with Rajiv. So that's my background. I, of course, became familiar with Rajivji's work, Invading the Sacred, which I believe came out in 2007. I was teaching in a study abroad program uh, back then in Orville. That's when it came out. I very happily purchased a copy. Interestingly, his being different is a text that I have used thrice in one of my courses on cultural psychology that I have taught at Sofia University. Um, Rajivji had also invited me to co-author Indra's Net in 2013-14. I think that was the time period when it was written. Um, I didn't have time, incidentally, so I could not, contribute to that work. But when you would look at the acknowledgement section of that book, you will see that Rajivji has made an acknowledgement that I was involved in that project. So yeah, this is how things have evolved over a period of time. I'm very much in touch with Rajivji's thoughts. Our interactions have been very, very fruitful over a period of time. They have been sporadic and intermittent because in this period, I also had to develop my career as a professor. I think one of the high points of my interaction with Rajivji's thoughts has been the use of being different in an academic session, in an academic setting. And I think, you know, I'm the first person who has done this, to use his work academically in the West. See, Rajivji has always considered me as one of the brighter spots in this work which has been happening, and he was very quick to identify that. Way back in early 2000s, and in many different ways, he has spoken about me. Even when people would be organizing conferences on the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo, and if they were not familiar with me or with my work, Rajivji would insist that I became part of that. So, you know, the acknowledgement has happened privately as well as publicly. He has written some very good things about me on the Indic Traditions e-group as well. So I derive a lot of pleasure in this fact that he and I are co-partnering, co-authoring, and I'm pretty much sure that that this relationship over a period of time is going to deepen further and further. Both he and I are inspired by a flame, and this flame is divine. We have always thought about transforming India, transforming India academically, and making our contributions. And whether we come together or when we remain separate in our respective domains, we work in the same direction. So, you know, so this is the background in which um, our relationship has progressed over a period of time. Rajivji has always um, held me uh, in a very good way academically. When I started looking at the work of Infinity Foundation, I could see very clearly that Rajivji was pursuing the nationalist work of Sri Aurobindo, if you will. You know, he was contextualizing it for the current times. Um, he was innovative and creative with it as well. As a, I mean, my prism has been Sri Aurobindo, so that is through which I looked at the work of Infinity Foundation. So what I found was that that in a very creative way, it was this divine work of Sri Aurobindo which was being pursued. And what Rajiv ji has done over a period of time, and I'm pretty much sure that he's going to do in the future also, is basically expose this problematic academic, quote unquote, academic relationship that exists between West and India. And if I look at this exchange, I find that, forget about representing India properly, the West has either been demonizing India or it has been appropriating from it. And Rajiv ji has been working in both these areas. Now, for any civilization to be a leader, it is extremely important that its thought processes are absolutely sound. The academia in India at this point in time is massively westernized. It is massively westernized. So despite the fact that Rajiv ji has been doing this work for a very long period of time, his work is still in periphery, if you will. This work has to become part of the mainstream, not only in India, but also in the West. And this is the work which I feel that the next layer of thought ladder, of thought leaders, should be doing. And that is where I think, his work will become even more important than what it has been so far. But as I said, in order to transform academia, that has been Rajivji's singular focus for a very long period of time. And that is why, you find these books that can be considered dense with long footnotes and so on and so forth. And given the interactions that he and I have had, uh, despite the fact that that he's quite appreciative of the social change that has happened because of his writings, he would be most satisfied if he sees academia getting transformed. Because I personally feel that that's where the core of his battle is. And that is what he has been attempting over a period of time. And that is what he is going to do for the rest of his life. I'm very clear about it. So I would say through this forum that it is important, for young scholars to become part of this movement. And it is very easy to sort of seek name and fame, but that is not going to make that difference. What is important is to basically understand the things that he has been doing and then work in a rigorous manner so that books, research articles are written in the future and a massive body of literature or research gets generated, which makes this hegemonic, monolithic, thing called academia uh, fall apart. That's how I see his work. See, because of my own academic involvement, I have not been able to go through all his books, right? So it will be very difficult for me to pick one. Uh, but I would say that all his books have actually made a difference. And if I leave the books that are talking about artificial intelligence and technology, about which I don't really understand much, I feel that his books will fall in this two category that I spoke about. Western demonization, of India, and the appropriation that has been happening from India. Appropriation and repackaging of Indian thought, which has been happening in the West. So these are two categories, and I think all the books are absolutely brilliant in this particular field. When you look at the manuscripts that our ancestors have left behind, it would not be an exaggeration to say that we have been a knowledge civilization. And it is important that we recover that for the progress of the Indic civilization as well as for humanity. So while Rajivji and I were interacting, and as I mentioned earlier, my contact with Rajivji happened in the context of an international conference. My first three papers that I published happened because of the support of Infinity Foundation that I got. So I would write the papers, and Infinity Foundation would fund my travel for presentation of those papers to travel, for presentation. And interestingly, by the grace of the divine, I would say that all those three papers became part of conference proceedings. So that's how my my publications happened. I can name those papers for you. And there was one titled Relativism, Self-Referentiality, and Beyond Mind, which I had presented at IIT Kharagpur. And this paper got published alongside the likes of ECG Sudarshan, who was nominated twice uh, for Nobel Prize in Physics. There was another luminary figure called Kapila Vatsyayan. She also has contributed in that book. And then there was another paper titled Relativism and its Relevance for Psychology. This happened when we were relaunching Indian psychology in India. And there's another story, which remains to be spoken about in detail, which is Rajivji's contribution in relaunching this field called Indian psychology, which is part of Indian academia. So relativism and its relevance for psychology was presented at a conference which relaunched Indian psychology. And then for the first paper, I presented a paper called Beyond Postmodernism, the Meeting of East and West, which later became a book chapter in Foundations of Indian Psychology with the title Beyond Mind, the Future of Psychology as Science. So this is the story, of my initial contact with Rajivji. So I think, when he was going through these articles of mine, he saw that I was making some novel contributions in academia. The contents of these papers are as novel today as they were back then. So this, I would say that this was also the reason why he could see the spark, which was there in me. So yeah, so what I was saying is that, the bar that Rajivji has for people is very high. So it is not only that you have to show that that you have something in you, you have to follow it up with your work. And once you begin to do that, that is when you start coming in the inner circles of Infinity Foundation. So you have to basically walk your talk. And going back, to what we have been conversing, this is a movement. This is a movement in a certain sense. This is second independence for India. We got our political independence way back in 1947, but we are actually, quote unquote, clamoring for second independence. And this will happen when we will offload the shackles of this colonial thought that has been working on us in explicit and implicit ways. Today, colonization of the Indian mind has become a buzzword, right? But in order to fully decolonize the mind, uh, it requires a, a rigorous amount of work. What does that work entail? You have to understand Western thought. You have to understand how the West has created colonial knowledge on India. Then you have to understand how that thought has been internalized in you. And as you are doing this, you have to keep inquiring what the Indian system of thought has been over a period of time. You know, culture and knowledge systems, they never remain the same. They keep shifting and moving. But there's always this overarching canopy of Indian cosmology, which has allowed this play to happen over a period of time. And because we were a knowledge culture, we have been prolific in writing this stuff. Our ancestors were prolific writers. So we have to understand what India has been over a period of time. And it is through this inquiry that a thorough decolonization of the Indian mind will happen. So it's, this entire work entails a lot of work. It requires sadhana. And once again, the word sadhana should not be diluted. Sometimes it is the work of a lifetime to start making interventions. In fact, through this conversation, I would want to make an appeal. I personally feel that, you know, the Indian government, irrespective of the party line, you know, hasn't really taken cognizance of the extent to which our academia is westernized and colonized. And just by sloganeering, this change is not going to happen. In fact, I say that decolonization of India will happen exactly in the same manner in which its colonization happened. So look at the process, from 1757. So a good chunk of India came under the control of the British, right? In 1784, they established Asiatic Society with explicit agenda of what they wanted to do in India and how they wanted to study the Indian texts. They start engaging in this practice and they do it for a good number of years. A lot of translations happened at that point in time. All these pieces of literature began to travel to Europe. And they got worked and reworked in many different ways. This is not the time to talk about this, but there have been many different uh, positions that European scholars have taken, on Indian texts. But one thing is very clear, that throughout the 19th century, the Europeans were deeply engaged with Indic ideas and Indic thought. Now, it is not that the Britishers started establishing, universities in India right away. So they start this work of translation and study in 1784. Macaulay did his thing in 1835, right? Even after that, universities teaching British knowledge on India were not put together, were not established. It is only in 1850s that they started this process. So look at the amount of research that the Britishers did on us. So what is it that you have? They established research institutions. They started with Asiatic Society. They created more Asiatic societies uh, in different cities in India. Research, production of knowledge, and then formation of universities. And it is through these universities that they started teaching their stuff, which we continue to internalize. So my appeal to the Indian government is to basically take notice of the work which is getting generated from Infinity Foundation and really support it in a big way. In fact, I am of the belief that India should have a ministry of decolonization where serious work by serious scholars happens. Otherwise, decolonizing the Indian mind will remain a buzzword. And sometimes I know when because I'm very passionate about it, I even become angry at the fact that not much work is being done in this area. So there will have to be a very concerted effort, which will be which will need to be done by people like Rajiv ji and me. I'm pretty much sure that Rajiv ji will be able to pick other scholars as well, who will make an important contribution in this area. And it is through this, through the production of literature, through the production of good teaching materials, that the change will come about. Otherwise, I personally feel at this point in time, we are creating a schizophrenic split amongst the students. On one hand, they're through social media, they're becoming aware of the kind of work that Rajivji is generating, right? But when they go back to the university system, they have to read and study the same archaic material, right? And in order to pass examinations, they have to regurgitate that thought. Now, it is not that that thought is not making an impression on them. I personally feel that they are caught between two different ideas. On one hand, they are becoming familiar with ideas with which they resonate. And on the other, they have to study and read what they do not resonate with. Now, just think, what it is going to do to the students. It is definitely going to create a split in them. How are they going to resolve the split? How are we going to resolve the split civilizationally? These are some of the questions, which have to be raised. And I think the government will have to take notice of this. Asiatic society or Asiatic societies were funded and supported by the East India Company. The British Crown, much later, supported the work which was happening on India. So until unless, there's state support for this kind of work, the shift is not going to happen. It will be a repeat of the cycle. I'll give you an example. When you look at the literature of Sri Aurobindo, you'll find that he's voluminous on these matters, absolutely voluminous. What happened to the ideas of Sri Aurobindo after independence? They were completely pushed underground. His ideas became subterranean. And I was talking to you about my own intellectual development between 93 and 98. And I personally feel that I have been a prolific or a voracious reader right from the very beginning of my life. But I came across the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo quite accidentally. Why should this happen? So what I feel is that if the state support is not going to be there might be a repeat of that cycle. And I think that is not good. That is not good. You know, it has already happened. Uh, there was a lot of very good literature that was generated by Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan also. What happened to that? All those pieces of literature, have been completely suppressed. They are invisible now. I don't want the works of Rajiv ji to become invisible in the future, you know. So I would also want to make an appeal to the government to take notice of this work which is going on and really support it in a sound manner. See, the fact of the matter also is that I've been living and breathing these ideas for a very long period of time. You know, this flame has actually been ignited by Sri Aurobindo, and I'm not one of those usual kinds, who will do lip service to this. Once my being turned to the teachings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, it has remained devoted and connected. And that is one of the reasons why, I'm one of those people who has always spoken his mind in academia.